the discussion on chapter 15, because this is what most people told me were interested in and had time to prepare. So I'll leave it to Thomas to show us the figures.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today, especially with this highest of Perry on the top. And I will talk today about accounting as the link between legal institutionalism and the money view. So today we have in Europe the situation that we have a lawyer and a macroeconomist who cannot really talk to each other because they lack a shared paradigm. Here we have Wolfgang Schäuble, who is aware of the legal and institutional problems of the southern periphery, is guided by orthodox neoclassical economics, and therefore recommends policies like austerity and enforces Maastricht. And on the other hand, we have Yanis Varoufakis, who is a macroeconomist. He is aware of things like the paradox of thrift, and he's guided by heterodox or post-Keynesian economics. And he would suggest different things like a New Deal or something. So we at ANEP Economics, we want to try to get to this shared paradigm. And like the main pillars are law, accounting, and macroeconomics. So in this talk we will start with law, and then move over to accounting, and then last to macroeconomics. So, start with law. Here we have a sort of scheme which may be familiar to most of you, since you are already familiar with law, some of you are lawyers. So we have here the distinction between non-law and law, which also Geoff is emphasizing very much. And this non-law section mostly happens in a pre-state context, where we have reciprocity, and people are relating to each other by knowing each other. So that's gift exchange, or if you don't know one another, then there's foreignness and deception. But important to notice is that also in the non-law sector is the interstate case, because we don't have a central authority on an international level. And here we also have a kind of reciprocity, which is done by diplomacy or war. There are certain international public law things, but they're not really law in the narrow sense. Also interesting is, even if we have a state, a centralized authority, we may have a theocracy, which is again non-law. And this is not only relevant for the Middle Ages, but with the rise of Islamic states, also for today. And of course here we have the classical Western modern case of the rule of law. And we divide the law in these three basic categories: private law, public law, and constitutional law. And of course in private law we have property rights and contracts as the basic elements. Okay, now this slide shows that this is the International Property Rights Index, and we see that all the developed economies also are in the top 20% of the protection of property rights, all these developed countries here. So this is a strong indication that a functioning legal system is important for economic activity. So if we have like business people acting within a legal system, then they use a certain way of keeping track of their legal rights and obligations, and this is done by accounting. So we have here, accounting is also done in stock flow consistent modeling and modern monetary theory. However, what we emphasize is the legal character of these balance sheets. So instead of talking about economic subjects, we call it legal persons, and they are accounting for legally enforceable money-denominated rights and obligations. So this side of the balance sheet is not the asset side, but the right side, and accountants call the financial assets or in the legal sense, financial assets are claims, and tangible assets or real assets are property rights. So this emphasizes strongly that the actual focus of economic activity is not the tangible things themselves, but it's like the layer above that, which is just the sphere of rights and obligations. Here on the right side we have obligations and net worth. Which brings us to balance sheets in terms of law. And here we have marked in red the genuine legal terms, claimed obligations, property rights, and blue are accounting terms. So net worth is not really a legal term. You can't sort of enforce net worth in a way. You cannot do that. But net worth is the balance of rights minus obligations. Property rights plus claims minus obligations. And similarly, we define another accounting quantity, net financial assets, which is the balance of claims and obligations, C minus O. So we see that the net worth is property rights plus net financial assets. And net financial assets, of course, describes my position if I am a net debtor or a net creditor. But if I am a net debtor, it does not mean that I'm insolvent, because I can have enough property rights to have a positive net worth. Okay, so this is a little slide showing how these different kinds of law and interact, have their place, and how citizens interact with this kind of law. So here is private law with property rights, claims, and obligations. And this private law is enforced by the central authority. And it does so by civil courts. And necessary for this is public law. So we need sort of order, command, we need police to enforce this private law for it to be reliable. And then we also have constitutional law, which constrains the power of the state, so we don't have a dictatorship. Okay. So moving now from accounting to micro-macro. This is the sectoral balances approach, in a way, a little different way. So we start with a partial group, which can be one single unit, one single legal person, or a group of legal persons, but not the whole economy. As an example, you can imagine this is Germany, with claims and obligations and property rights. And then we consider the complementary group. So this is the whole rest of the world. You can also write an aggregate balance sheet for that. And if we aggregate these two, we arrive at a balance sheet of the closed economy, of the world economy. And there, it is clear that the claims and obligations are equal, because the claim is just the other side of an obligation. So, in consequence, also property rights are of the same size as the net worth on a global scale. So introducing again our net financial assets, claims minus obligations, we see that the net financial assets of the partial group plus the net financial assets of the complementary group equals net financial assets of the aggregate economy, which is 0. Or written differently, net financial assets of the partial group is exactly the negative of the net financial assets of the complementary group. In this framework, we can also define now means of payment very precisely. Means of payment can be a subset of claims or a subset of property rights. As a subset of claims, these are credit means of payment, so for example central bank notes or demand deposits. And as a subset of property rights, these are commodity means of payment, like gold or other coins. And now we have a clear distinction between these two sets, net financial assets and means of payment. And this distinction is also very crucial for businessmen, as they sometimes buy something but not yet pay it. So they have to keep track of what they still have to pay. and make a clear distinction between buying and paying. And this is done in these categorization of transactions. So if you have 3 layers, these are transactions involving change in the stock of means of payment. These involve changes in net financial assets, and these involve change in net worth. And these numbers here, we can find an example for each number. Let's start with 1, which is a receipt but not a revenue, which would be when someone pays me back a loan. So I get the means of payment from him, but my net financial assets stay the same because my claim disappears. Yeah, and these distinctions have been brought into macroeconomics by the German economist Wolfgang Stützl. And he also has a very systematic way of making the transition from micro to macro. So here's Charlotte Brun. Using Stützl's scheme, we no longer have to choose between doing macro that has no micro foundation and micro that ignore macro relations. And
which is one of the problems in economics today.
yeah. So Stützl usually starts by describing this with people sitting in a cinema. So we have like lots of superheroes here. And he says, now one can just increase his field of vision by standing up. But the problem is that therefore he decreases the field of vision of some other guy. And if like everybody would stand up, then nobody would see any better, but now all the people have to stand. And he formalizes this in a very, very precise way. So he has a partial statement which says one person can increase his field of vision by standing up. Then he has a global statement. The totality of people cannot increase their field of vision by standing up. And he has a relational statement. Each group of people can increase the field of vision just by the amount that they decrease the field of vision of others. And this scheme we can now apply to, for example, our net financial assets. So the partial statement, every single subject or partial group can achieve a surplus of revenues over expenditures, thus increasing net financial assets. But the global statement, all subjects together can never achieve a surplus of revenues over expenditures. In the aggregate, revenues and expenditures are equal. And the relational statement then is, a group can achieve a surplus of revenues over expenditures only to the extent that the complementary group achieves a surplus of expenditures over revenues. So we see that on the level of revenues and expenditures, capitalism is a zero-sum game. However, this does not hold on the level of yields cost, so on the level of net worth. In this case, if in the aggregate economy the value of property, for example, declines in a debt deflation, then the net worth of the whole economy is declining. And we see here is the current account balance of different countries, and we see that well, you don't really see it, but the sum of the current account balance, of course, is zero. This is the net financial assets of the world, and if all the countries are like trying to have a positive balance of net financial assets, like Germany does, and is recommending like to everybody else in Europe, we sort of get a race to the bottom that people states lowering wages, and we basically get a worldwide debt deflation, which is not so nice. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should move directly into discussion and take 15-20 minutes to engage with Thomas.